Hello there internet friends, it's G from the Archworks as per usual, and we're back with the, I guess, final episode of the process. I mean, there's probably still some more extra little bits and side content I can make about this, but for all intents and purposes, colouring is the final step on this one. So, last time you saw this, I was partway through done with the inking, so let's just very quickly give you a bit of a heads up on what exactly I've done here. Here is the inking as it exists. I should probably be gesturing with the pen and not my hands because you can't see me doing that. As you can see, I've added a couple of details that weren't actually there during the sketch. So obviously we've added like blood, we've added a nose ring, we've added a lot more just definition and details here and there, we've altered shapes and sizes. It's all part of the video, except obviously not the entire thing. So yeah, we're just going to get down to the inking, but first of all, just to give you a bit of a heads up on how exactly all this process is going to work, I'm going to quickly merge together all of these layers, because that's all inking. All three of those were different layers of different parts of the inking. We are going to change the color of this line art. Now, there are two main ways you can do this, or at least two main ways that I know of. One is to touch this little thing here. I don't actually know what that particular button is called. I've never moused over it long enough to find out. Let's just make the brush a little bit bigger, and then whoop. So what this actually, I should probably do that with a lighter color so you guys can actually see what I'm talking about. So yeah, you can see now that because this setting is clicked, any changes I make only apply to the actual layer itself. Anything that is basically transparent is unaffected. And that's a good way of doing it, but it's not the quickest and most efficient way of doing it. Well, I mean, it's technically the quickest if you can scribble really quickly. But what I prefer to do is I like to go to a new layer, and we're going to play with this setting here, which is use previous layer to create clipping mask. And what that basically does is it locks any changes you make to the above layer to the layer below, as you can see from this little arrow here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use layer 5. Obviously our inking is on layer 4, and it has exactly the same effect as if we just hit that button. So you can sort of see it here. Like, you can see that I'm actually making differences on this layer, and if I release the clipping mask, those changes exist. But put the clipping mask on, it only affects the layer underneath it. So that's another interesting way of doing colored line art. We're just going to very quickly get rid of that, because obviously we don't need to scribble. We can also just use the fill tool, and it has the same effect. I mean, I should probably do that with a color I can actually see. There you go. So we're going to go with the dark blue, because recently I've sort of fallen in love with doing dark blue line art. It helps add an element of softness to your lines, because just having harsh black is passable and it's fine. You can do that, like, no bones with it. I used to do it a lot, but since I discovered like how like you can diffuse and soften line art with just adding a touch of a color to it, like even if you're just like doing gray, that's going to add some softness to it. But I prefer to go with dark blue, because I've already sort of in my mind put together a bit of a color palette for this guy. We're going to go with a blue skin with kind of a complementary orange kind of detail thing to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick out a skin, actually no, we're not going to pick out a skin tone. What am I doing? We are going to make the background layer, that's not the background layer, that is the background layer. We're going to make the background layer grey. You've obviously seen me do this a lot during Let's Draws and stuff like that. This is just so colours and everything else shows up better on the background, because if you just leave it white, it's a bit jarring to look at. And yeah, so we're going to make a new layer underneath the line art, and what we're going to do now is use the magic wand tool, which is up here. We're going to select all of the blank space that we can find around the character. So obviously where all of this is like quite closely stuck together, there's no real gaps where there might be on other images. And then we're going to modify, I'm going to expand, and I usually leave this at about 2 pixels. At most I'll make it 3, but 2 usually seems to work. And what that's going to do is it's going to expand the area you selected. So it's not very noticeable, but it's basically made it 2 pixels bigger. And then what we're going to do is we're going to inverse. There is obviously a shortcut for this, Control-Shift-I. I just use the menus up there because I can't be bothered to remember the shortcuts. And what we're going to do is we're also going to use the lasso tool here. We're going to hold Alt, and we're going to deselect all of these little sweat droplets, because I don't really want them included in this. So that's them deselected. So what we've done now is essentially made ourselves a silhouette, or what I like to call a block for the character. So if we get rid of the inking, you can now see he is basically silhouetted, but like I said, I like to call it blocking, and this is a white blocking of the character. And this will take minimal cleanup to really get looking pretty, because obviously Photoshop not being the most precise program in the world, it will just accidentally leave bits out. And obviously you've probably just about seen me doing this on Let's Draws as well. Like, this is completely unavoidable. So we're just going to very quickly tidy up these little bits here, and it's usually just in tight corners and little nooks and crannies that you end up having to do this, but for the most part you get away with it. Okay, so we've blocked out the character, and now what we're going to do is look at a couple of examples. Like, I'm not going to go straight into the colouring right now. I'm going to show you a couple of colouring examples because I just happen to have some knocking about in my PSD files. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this guy, which is a very rough, very sort of slapdash approach to inking that I was doing. I decided not to use a sketch. I just did this completely as inks straight off the bat. And as you can see from the layer list, there are a lot of them, and these are all individual parts of the character. And this is a way you can do it, but it's not honestly ideal. I mean, at least not to me anyway. And realistically, this is just, you know, this is okay if you just want to mix things up and you want to do things slightly differently to keep things fresh in your head and stuff like that, and keep track of where each individual color lays. It's fine, but there are tidier ways to do this, and I'm going to show you just one example. Let's just close this. This is something I recently did, as in I literally did it yesterday at time of recording. This is like 83 layers in the works, and as you can see, I've made it fairly neat by adding different folders for each element. So obviously we've got the foreground details, which is fire, we've got the characters, and then we've got the background. So pretty self-explanatory, but if we open the folder like I did just before, you can see where I've added the color for the line art, and then a bunch of like different sort of hazy details just to add a little bit of dimensionality here and there. But you'll also see that I have actually done a white blocking for the character, and I've linked all of the individual color sections to that white blocking, which actually makes things a lot more neat and tidy than it needs to be. But for the purposes of demonstrating what exactly I'm talking about, that's kind of what I was getting at. So like I said, I'm just going to very quickly reset my colors, and then we're going to go for a sort of blue color for this guy's skin. So the skin is going to be a new layer. We're going to use a clipping mask, and that has now locked it to the white layer, so anything we do is on that white layer. So yeah, we're going to go for kind of a blue, not that kind of a blue, maybe, no, it's a bit too deep. So colouring is a lot of trial and error. Like you will find yourself constantly, oh okay, wait, am I on the right brush? Ah, okay, no I'm not. See, I've got a brush set aside for writing, which is, you know, no line weight whatsoever, no pressure sensitivity, but generally my colouring brush has some pressure sensitivity so I can get a little precise with it. So you don't need to be too neat if you're going to do colouring this way, where you're going to be layering different colours on top of one another. Like typically, like let's say the vest is a layer on top of the skin, you can get away with doing stuff like this, like just scribbling here and there. But I'm a bit of a stickler for colouring inside the lines. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I'm very proud of myself for being able to. So yeah, we're going to be doing it that way. Oh, there is also an easier way to be doing this, which also involves the magic wand tool. So let's say we select that, and then we do the expand real quick, and then we use the fill tool. Boom. That bit has now more or less been coloured. It takes minor cleanup depending on how detail intensive you were with your line art, but it does speed up things dramatically. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to lasso tool that section of colouring away, and we're actually going to do that as our main source of colouring, because, you know, why not do things the easy way? Obviously you're going to have to try and finesse it a little bit, like I said, with areas of much more intense detail like his face and stuff like that, but as long as you're just doing minimal cleanup after the fact, you have dramatically reduced the workload for yourself, which is fantastic. And because of the way we've done it with the clipping layers, you don't have to worry too much about being too precise with how you're just scribbling the details out. I mean, obviously doing it this way, you're going to find yourself maybe tripping over a little bit and accidentally forgetting to do some parts. Like, I do it a lot. Like, you'll see in some images where I've actually just completely missed small sections of color. I don't do it too much, which is fantastic, because it means I'm actually doing my job right. But still, oh, that sounds like my girlfriend this time. Whoops. Just a quick pause. So now we've blocked out all of his base colors, we can now work on details, which I'm going to put as a separate layer. And for sake of posterity, I'm actually going to label it details. Not that it makes any kind of a difference, but I'm doing it anyway. So details is basically just like odd little bits of color here and there that you don't really need to focus too much on when you're blocking out the basic colors. So stuff like his bruised eye here, maybe like I want to add some color difference to his horns. Maybe I'm going to add like just a tiny bit of color to like these veins just to make them pop out a bit more, like stuff like that. Like, it's not quite shading and it's not quite blocking out, but it's important stuff that adds just a little bit of character to things. So what we're going to do is we're going to select this color, we're going to move it up towards the purplish area. Maybe that's a bit too much. I'll move it just there, and I want it quite dark so you can definitely notice it. Yeah, there we go. I like that. So you can potentially get away with doing the old magic wand and fill tool thing. Oh, actually, I didn't even think about that. I put his eyebrows on the same layer as his skin. Okay, I'll fix that later. But basically, yeah, had I done that right, that wouldn't have been an issue. So we're just going to color this in, and like I was about to say, you can potentially get away with doing the magic wand and fill tool trick with some elements of detailing, but it's not often the case. This is where a lot of your freehanding skill will have to develop. And because he's got blue skin, I'm not going to go with the typical like orangey, peachy coloured scar tissue kind of colour that I normally would go with. We're going to go with like a nice light blue. And I know he's got scars here, so we'll do that there as well. So yeah. See, that purple eye is maybe a bit too harsh, and maybe we want to maybe go a shade lighter and then just go around the outside of it, just to sort of diffuse it a little bit. Like, there we go. Yeah, that kind of makes it look like it's bleeding out a little bit. Like, you know how bruises typically do, like they spread out and all that sort of stuff, and they turn a wonderful shade of green towards the end, actually. So maybe we'll add like a little bit of a deep turquoisey colour to there. And here, maybe? Yeah, it looks ugly. Cool. Here we have the base colours and the details and stuff like that. We can obviously get rid of the details if we need to, and that will make shading potentially easier, but we're just going to leave them there, because I'd like to see how shading is going to sit on top of all of this. So what I used to do for shading was I used to go straight to black, and I would drop that down to 25, and that's shading, but that's actually terrible. I mean, it's not terrible, it's passable, you can get away with doing that, but it's just a bit flat and boring and uninteresting. There's no colour, no depth to it. So what I do now is, instead of just dropping black to 25, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go for kind of a deep royal bluish kind of colour. Actually, that's more like a navy, not royal. What am I talking about? I don't know colours. We've very much established this. So yeah, that also doesn't look that great. But, like I said, I like to play around with these settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on normal, and then using the arrow keys, I'm going to just sort of mooch through them a little bit. That doesn't look too bad. Soft light, hard light, vivid light, pin light, yeah. Difference doesn't work. Exclusion. So basically, like, I'm not looking for anything that turns it green. Hue, you can barely notice. Hue is actually good for very particular looking things, and I'll show that off in a second. Saturation, no. I think soft light was probably the... yeah. And then, obviously, we can drop the opacity down if we need to. So I think like a 65. Yeah, that works. Ooh, and that actually makes the The reds pop really well there. Yeah, okay, that's a good colour. Like, basically, to test whether or not you've got a decent colour for shading, just do that, and then if any of that doesn't look any good, then don't keep it. I mean, that's kind of very subtle there, but whatever, we can work with it. Okay, so that's basically how I pick my colours for shading. It's not very precise, it's not very professional looking, but I'm a very trial and error kind of artist, so, you know, I play around, I see what I like. Obviously there are sort of set in stone rules for shading, like you need to pick where your light source is coming from, and you know, you'll see quite often a lot of artists, I shouldn't have deselected what colour I was using, don't worry, I can fix that, but you know, you'll see a lot of us like, oh, here's the light source and it's pointing this way and it's going to hit this and this, and I don't do that. You've obviously seen that I don't do that. Should I do that? Arguably yes, but I prefer to just sort of guesstimate where everything's going to go. So yeah, right, we can now put all of our settings back to where they were. You at 65, there we go. Right, provided I don't accidentally switch colours anytime soon, I won't have to do that again. So yeah, what I am going to do though is, like, obviously, as you've seen, I did sort of decide where my lighting is going to be hitting, so everything here is going to be lit, and everything like round about here-ish is going to be dark. And there are two ways to go about shading that I should show off. So obviously I'm doing the additive sort of way, which means you sort of add the shading as you go, but then there is also the subtractive kind of way, which is this. So we're just going to play with exactly the same settings, like soft light 65, and there you go, he is all over shaded, but we can then carve out bits of light as we go, and this is arguably an easier way if you are deciding where your light source is, sort of on the fly. And you'll sometimes see me doing this in Let's Draws, but not very often, because when you're typically just doing characters, like, you don't really tend to go with the subtractive method, you tend to go more with the additive one. But this one does work for our purposes, so let's play around with this. And I may even speed up this part, because colouring, while not exactly a particularly labour intensive process, like compared to some other parts, like obviously the sketching I would argue is the most labour intensive part. It's kind of a time consuming one, so like I said, I am probably going to skip ahead a little bit and I will catch up with you. What am I doing? Yeah, the details there, so add back his eyebrow here. So yeah, I'll probably skip ahead and I'll show you where I get to with that in a bit. So, see you in a bit. Alright, and we're back. Okay, so just to sort of briefly explain to you what happened in that sort of sped up part. Obviously I kept the subtractive shading because I kind of liked the look of it better. And obviously I did a bit of the highlights as well, which I probably could have done with explaining, but I'm going to do it now. Basically what I did was I went with a lighter shade of blue, I switched it to vivid light because I've been getting some really good results with that lately. And I put that down to about 55, it doesn't really matter to be exact. And I sort of just went back everywhere where the light would definitely be touching, and that's really all there is to my shading. Really, there's not really that much else to it. I mean, I might add a little extra layer of it here and there, so let's just quickly do that. Like, we'll put like about 30, and then we'll do another soft light layer. We'll go with another dark blue, it doesn't really need to be exact, and we'll just like add a bit there, you know, just in bits where the shading would be more harsh, but we don't necessarily have to do that, so I'm not going to include it. But I just wanted to show it just to illustrate that to you. But yeah, that was colouring, and that's the entire process. I mean, I could add a border colour around it like I do sometimes, but I think that's kind of overkill with this. It actually looks fairly good on its own. And yeah, that's the whole process. It's actually done now. It's only taken me, what, 3 weeks ish? I don't know, but it's been a bit of a bizarre experience. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I hope I can get better at doing this sort of stuff, so I can maybe do this again and update you whenever anything changes with my process. But yeah, if you've still got questions and I've still got answers, feel free to throw them down in the comments. I'll see what I can do for you. Like I said, I want to maybe put together some other videos about like just little bits and pieces that aren't necessarily the process, but are just sort of important things to remember and do and practice and stuff like that. So if you guys are interested in that, obviously again, down in the comments, let me know. But that has been this. I've been G, that has been Arco over there.
Hello.
And that's been the process, so thank you for watching.
Hello.
I'll see you in the next video, whenever that's going to be and whatever that's going to be. Goodbye.